Much talked about bill to strip federal funding from Acorn may wind up having a much larger effect. Monica Novotny here to explain.
Dylan, the House passed legislation to cut all federal funding from the embattled community group. Acorn has been implicated in voter fraud cases, even accused of offering clients advice on prostitution and tax evasion. But it's not the only government-contracted organization that has faced serious charges. Now, the language in the House bill would strip funding from organizations that were indicted for breaking election laws, violating lobbying rules, or committing regulatory fraud. So on the face of it, who's going to argue with that? Well, except for that, if that is the case, then major corporations like AT&T, Boeing, GlaxoSmithKline would also see their federal dollars cut off. Dylan.
Understood. The Project on Government Oversight compiled a list of more than 6 companies, in fact, who will be directly impacted by this House bill as it stands. Danielle Bryan is the group's executive director. She joins us from Washington. Also with us, Democratic strategist Karen Finney. Danielle, are we actually moving to a place, and I would say rightly so, a fair place, where if you are defrauding the taxpayer for federal funding, whether it's by way of some foolishness at Acorn or some outrageousness at Halliburton or any place else, that the taxpayer for the first time maybe ever will actually have recourse and penalty?
Isn't it pretty fabulous? We might actually be seeing accountability with federal contractors.
It would be bizarre. So walk us through where would the state of play and the effort to restore fairness in this country?
Right. Well, what's happened is the House passed language that was not specific just to Acorn, and as you described, it had this one provision that said, but if you filed a false paper to a state or federal regulatory agency, then you'd be cut off from federal funding. That affects the defense industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the oil and gas industry. It's really pretty extraordinary. On the Senate side, though, they passed language that was specific to Acorn, and all experts who have looked at this have said that that's probably unconstitutional.
Yeah, Karen, again, you know better than anybody, and certainly in this conversation, how much happens that we don't see, and if we have our way, we'll see it all soon enough. We have the ability to. The internet exists. All the secrets will soon, the skeletons will soon be seen. But with that said, how is it that a piece of legislation that targets one particular organization defrauding the taxpayer even comes to exist when there's an opportunity for politicians to protect taxpayers from all organizations that would defraud us?
You mean actually do their job and hold corporations accountable?
Or any, why pick on corporations? Anybody
accountable, yeah. How about that? Wouldn't that be nice?
So what's the rest of the story, Karen?
Here's what's going on. I mean, this bill was passed. This is the kind of reactionary legislation that we see from time to time. You know, there were these allegations about Acorn, some of which may be legitimate. It's still being investigated. That's a good thing.
Yes.
And in reaction to that, there was a sort of political knee-jerk that said, "Oh, we want to distance ourselves from Acorn, so okay, we're going to, pass this legislation." I would say on the Senate side, they were trying to be more specific, and on the House side, obviously, they kind of caught themselves in their own game there by having such broader language. And I love that. I think that's good for them to, I think it's good for them to have to take a step back and say, wait a second, maybe we should think about some of these things before we actually just, take an action like this.
Sure. But ultimately, Danielle, what is the momentum underneath the legislation to protect taxpayers from any organization that would seek to steal our money or defraud us in some way, whether it's Acorn or Halliburton?
Well, the great thing is this was actually something that was discussed in the last Congress, and at the time the Chamber of Commerce was all over it, saying there's no way you can be cutting off funding because you've been violating crimes as a federal contractor, and those provisions died. And so what ended up living through this Congress and passing was only a database that you could keep track of misconduct, but it wasn't even going to be public. So that was as much as the Congress intentionally wanted to do in terms of holding contractors accountable. Now that they've done this, I'm hoping we're going to at least see that database of federal contractor misconduct at least be public and be part of the discussion when there's new contracts that are going to be
Karen Finney, how could they legally keep it private? In other words, if in fact taxpayers are insane enough to continue to pay taxes into this government, and then this government is insane enough to continue to dole it out to the special interests that bribe them, there's a point where it's going to become a bit impossible, I would imagine, to hold these secrets and to maintain this old, outdated system that Washington is desperately clinging to.
Well, absolutely, but I would bet you that the majority of Americans don't even realize that that legislation was passed last year, that there is such a database, therefore they don't even know to demand that they should have access
to it. That's okay. I'm on 2 hours a day on MSNBC.
Okay,
I'm on WABC on Sunday nights. You can check it out on the internet. You blog for the Huffington Post. There's enough way to get
it out there.
I think we can make people know now.
I think we should, and my point is, it's, people have to demand it, quite frankly. It is part of our job to hold these guys accountable. You're right. There should be absolutely no reason, if it's our money, that we shouldn't be able to see how our money is being spent, misspent, mishandled, what corporations are, accessing federal dollars. Again, our money. But again, let's remember that with the Acorn legislation, that was not the goal initially of that piece of legislation. This could end up being a very positive outcome for the rest of us, but unfortunately that wasn't the goal when they actually passed this legislation.
You know they like to say in Washington, unintended consequences for legislation. Well, maybe we actually had a surprisingly beneficial unintended consequence, which is actual penalties for actual entities that actually defraud actual taxpayers out of their actual money, as bizarre as that actually may be. Danielle, thank you very much. Karen, I'll talk to you soon.